Hey, welcome to the Pharmacy Residency Podcast, member of the Pharmacy Podcast Network. I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about the NAPLEX scores and kind of what we can do between now, which is March. I'm at APHA right now, and when you guys graduate. So let's talk about two things. One, how are the NAPLEX scores going to affect your ability to get a residency in phase two? And then kind of for RPDs and for those of you that are going into residency, how are these lower NAPLEX scores going to affect you in terms of who is in your cohort? So one of the things that I think we don't do a good job of is really explaining how to do well on the NAPLEX. And we kind of took for granted the NAPLEX back when I graduated because most people passed it. It wasn't really that big of a deal. And yeah, you can make the joke that, oh, well, it was Tylenol and aspirin, weren't the only two drugs you had back then to discover penicillin. I graduated in 97, so it wasn't that long ago, 25 years or so, 26 years. And I think it was that, the acceptance rate was much, much lower. And I think it's reasonable to say the acceptance rate was probably somewhere around 30% to get into pharmacy school. So this graduating class, their acceptance rate is a little over 82%, going on 83%. And as we kind of move to the next couple of years, it rises up to 87 and then falls actually a little bit in the class that was most recently entered. So the admission standards have been, raised a little bit. But again, this is going to be something that's a real issue. And what I think is most important is to kind of get pharmacology down before you go to each of your APPEs. So if you're doing cardiology APPE, to do the cardiology part of the NAPLEX studying, and I know RX prep is, kind of the go-to for a lot of people, but how do you do RX prep on your commutes to and from work as you're trying to, and I was like this, I worked at Giant Food, which is a regional grocery store back in the Baltimore, Washington area. And I would literally go from my APPE to work, to home, to my APPE, to work, to home. And I burnt out pretty bad. But it was just, when would I possibly have extra time to study? And the answer to that is on your commute. And the free resource I have is the Memorizing Pharmacology podcast. I really focus on those mnemonics, and you're going to be told over and over again to not memorize, but to learn and to understand. But you still have to memorize the alphabet if you're going to speak in whatever language you speak in. So I think that memorization has a place and the mnemonics have a place. And really what the mnemonics do is they help you get it straight in your head. So completely free resource is the Memorizing Pharmacology podcast. You can find it wherever your podcasts are. But if you want to get a little bit of an extra boost, I have a self-paced pharmacology course with mobile quizzes and videos. So if you're going into a top 200 course or you're going into therapeutics, I think that course and really seeing the mnemonics and keeping things straight in your head is a lot more helpful as you kind of go along. I'm still helping a few people with their letters of intent as they're going into this phase two. And I'll talk a little bit about the scramble because I think it's reasonable that the scramble will actually have quite a few students if you have over 700 spots just for PGY1 and almost 1,000 spots with PGY1, PGY2. But if you want that free resource, again, Memorizing Pharmacology podcast, and then residency.teachable.com if you want the self-paced pharmacology course. So let's talk a little bit about NAPLEX scores, and I'm only going to talk about the averages. I'm not interested in embarrassing that. One program was at, I think, 21% with the NAPLEX, and then the NAPLEX goes from 21% up to 100% pass rate, and the MPJE goes from 25% up to 96% pass rate. So let's talk about the NAPLEX first. And so what we see is a gradual decline. Well, not so gradual from 2 years ago to last year, but last year to this year is a little bit gradual. So we went from 86% to 82% to 80%. Okay. And the issue that we have is that the NAPLEX scores came out before your phase 2 RPDs are accepting you for and ranking you here in April. So now RPDs traditionally couldn't see the NAPLEX scores that were most recent, and they were usually a year separate. So it was really tough to really say, is this student likely going to pass the NAPLEX? Are they going to pass the MPJE? And the answer is that's going to be a little bit more difficult now because the scores have gone down. And really, it's not the average that you're looking at. It's that there are schools, the one school in the 20 is really an outlier, the 21%. But when you get to, 50%, 60%, even the 70s, that's really tough, because now your residency class is likely to lose at least 1 or 2 students. So think about this. We've got an 80% pass rate. Any residency class with 5 students is likely to lose 1 student because of the NAPLEX. And if you use that kind of simple logic, it would sort of make sense. But when we think about residency, you realize that, well, these students were kind of vetted, and, a group kind of dropped out before, and the actual, acceptance rate is closer to 65% rather than 75%. So, you would expect that students that are going into residency to at least be, a little more likely to pass the NAPLEX than the average student at their school. But the MPJE, again, is no joke either. So the MPJE pass rate is again, gone down a little bit from 83 to 79 to 77. But as you know, in statistics, these are independent events. So it's like you roll the dice on somebody in their NAPLEX score, and then you look at their MPJE, and that's something that as a program, as a residency program, you might want to actually consider seeing if you can be part of helping them prep for it. So, great, you guys are all coming together. Why don't we do this? Why don't we have a group come together to try to help each other pass the MPJE in that state? Some states are notorious for having archaic MPJEs, and Idaho is well known for not having the MPJE. They just said, it just doesn't really make sense. So if I were going to a VA where I can be licensed in any state, I would take the NAPLEX and then get licensed in Idaho, because it doesn't matter where you're going to get licensed to work at the VA. And the reason for that is that the MPJE is actually more likely to knock you out than the NAPLEX. And if you're coming from one state and going to a different one, you're in a lot more trouble. So again, my recommendation for MPJE is that, great, is there any way we can bring our, new PGY1 class together? Well, the best way to do that is to have an activity that you do together. And the best way to do that is to start studying for the MPJE together. I'm not being paid by TLDR, but TLDR has an MPJE for every single state in the union. And I think it's like $75 or something like that, which when you talk about, the damage that will be done if you don't pass the MPJE, that's a bargain. And let's take a look at, kind of, well, if you're looking at MPJE and you say, well, when you're in residency, you don't actually lose money. And that sounds a little bit strange, but if you have a regular job, you don't get paid. You don't go from intern to, to pharmacist. You don't get that pay bump where you actually get paid as a pharmacist. But with residency, you get the same pay throughout residency, whether you're licensed or not. The question is your residency program going to accept someone who failed either the MPJE or NAPLEX? Did you take it so late that you can't take it again? And so, I really am not trying to be doom and gloom. And what I'm trying to do is trying to be very practical here, that you need to take a hard look at your own colleges. There's two places you need to look. You need to look at your own college's NAPLEX rate and realize, okay, I'm not above that. The analogy I always use is when we talk about soccer, when you have rec players playing rec players and you've got the best rec team, there, and they think, wow, we're really good. And so you tend to say, okay, well, we don't really need to do extra practices for the championship or something like that. And then you've got select teams, which literally have been selected, where you have to have a certain standard of soccer. And I know it's so much for a darn 12-year-old to have to do. My kids have to do this every May where they have to qualify for their team. And so you need a certain level of ability and experience that kind of comes along with it. And so my real concern is that you are thinking you are top of your class. But if top of your class is one of the lower scoring and NAPLEX and MPJE scores, well, that means that you're going to really need to work a lot harder to make sure that you pass. And my concern is this, that because residency acceptance rates are so high, the exposure to students who are going to fail the MPJE, the exposure to students that are going to fail the NAPLEX is much higher. And so RPDs, if they're doing their due diligence, are taking a strong look at the NAPLEX pass rates that came out. And so is it fair? No, it's not fair for you to be judged on what a class last year did. And but what they're looking at is, okay, well, how challenging was the environment you were in? And I think MPJE is not a good analysis of that, because there are some state tests that are incredibly hard and archaic and don't really match up to much of what you would expect, and even the study materials are incredibly difficult to kind of put together. So some states are just really hard to pass, and I don't think that that's any reflection of the school. It's just those are hard to pass. But the NAPLEX scores, that's a standardized test across the country. And when you have a school that's going to be accredited that has a 21% pass rate, that has 50% pass rate, 60% pass rate, you really got to start thinking about, is that fair to a student to have paid $50,000, $60,000 a year for that outcome? And you say, well, it's on the student. Well, once you get to 20% or 21% or 25% or whatever, I don't think this is as much on the student as it is on the school itself. So, for the students who are going into residency, just know that if you have a lower pass rate, I might increase the number of applications, because, it's reasonable that the RPD and the group that's going to be assessing you is going to be looking at that. And then if you're, on the RPD side, really, is there a way you can bring your cohort together before the cohort comes together in June and July to say, hey, here are the materials you're going to need for the MPJE. We are going to ask you to start meeting and start talking about it and try to be a good accountability partner, so that, we're not going to have NAPLEX prep here at the, residency, but we will have MPJE prep, because that's when it's likely people are coming from out of state. So about 50% in most cases will go out of state, out of region. So again, if you need my help, TonyThePharmacist@gmail.com. There's, I don't really do a ton with everybody until it gets to, that September, October, November, when letters of intent start again. But do consider the pharmacology course as a way to kind of start thinking about NAPLEX. I think it's going to help you quite a bit at residency.teachable.com. You can just listen to them on the way to and on the way from your rotations now, and as you're kind of going into residency. And then those of you in the CPJE, the percentages have gone up some, but we're still seeing, a pass rate around 63%. Much more likely if you're from California to pass it than if you're not. But, 2 out of 3 pass. And so those residency directors are really in a bit of a pickle, knowing that so many of their residents are going to need a retake or need to do it again. So all I can say is it's going to come up quick on you. People say, well, just start studying 10 weeks before, 12 weeks before. Well, we're here. It's like 12 weeks before. We're in the end of March. So April, May, June, it's time to start making sure you get this down. And I think that listening to, although they're all videos with quizzes, right? You can use them on your phone. Everything can be done on the phone. But I think that you really need to start listening to things on the way to and on the way back. And I think that having a contained course where you can say, okay, I got this module done, this module done, this module done, I think it's going to put you in a lot better position. So TonyThePharmacist@gmail.com. Hope you guys are enjoying APHA. For those of you that made it, it's just a wonderful kind of tradition. And yeah, talk to you soon.